Good afternoon to all. I'm Tony Babarovic. I'm from Croatia, Institute of Social Sciences, Ivo Pilar. So I will split this presentation in half, in fact, with Ognian from the INET from France. I will firstly talk about the importance of piloting and a few slides about that, and then I will talk about the first piloting that we have done. It's called pre-piloting of cognitive interviewing the children to see the quality of our questionnaires, in fact, and understanding of our questionnaires. And then Ojan will say more about the first pilot of our questionnaire in 5 countries. So when you look at the piloting, definitions of piloting is not so cut clear answer what piloting is. So for certain, it's made prior to the main study. It's usually on a smaller scale than the main study, and the main purpose of the piloting is to improve the quality of the questionnaire and the procedures and the effectiveness of the all procedure of in the main study. We think that piloting and very careful piloting is very important for the guide for several reasons. Reasons I will say later. It's a really huge and very demanding study all over the European countries. Very, very big sample sizes. So if anything went wrong, it's problematic. So we think that pilot is crucial to be done properly and prepare the main study to be more the best or most qualitative. Okay, but when we look at the piloting reports in different, especially longitudinal cohort studies, it's usually underreported and under-discussed. It's usually done, but in different ways and different procedures. And we know that's a really necessary and very important tool to test the research feasibility and the main study. And it certainly provides some benefits, mostly in presenting the research feasibility on one hand, but also provides some estimates of financial estimates of the main study. Of course, we did it. And it also can have some role in attracting some research grants if you present some piloting results before the main study, so you can attract some grants and money for the main one. Okay, and in the big longitudinal birth cohort study is even more important to have the good piloting. In fact, when you look at several different we made a systematic review of a dozen different bird cohort studies focused on piloting and how it's done. I think it's really, really essential because the bird cohort studies are large. It's like we will plan to have like 10,000 in the first wave or 5,000, depending on how big the country is. But it's very huge, it's very costly, and it's changing all the time. The kids, the respondents are changing in their course of lives. We have to change the structure of the questionnaire by each time point. We have to follow up them, and we have to have a best possible sample characteristics and the ways to attract the respondents, to keep them in the survey, and to keep them all these decades over. So design of the study is the most important. The piloting of this study is crucial. And what we know, how the piloting usually is done in different cohort studies. We indicated 3 types of piloting, in fact. The first is pre-testing. It's what we have done. It's usually done on some smaller sample size. It's usually qualitative in nature, and it's usually done on convenience samples and, I don't know, 20 or 50 participants in total. Then we have this called instrument test. That's what we call pilot here in this survey. It could be done both ways, qualitative and quantitative. We decided to do it quantitative, and it could be done on really samples, like really good random samples, completely the same as in the main study, but also can be done in some convenience sample sizes and approaches. And it's very variable. According to the sample size, it could be like 50% participants, but also could be like 500 participants. Is this piloting across the different longitudinal bird cohort service? And of course, there's a dress rehearsal. The dress rehearsal is something that you should done and plan to do just before the main survey. It should copy the main survey in all elements, how it works completely by the sample approach and characteristics, and by the methods of interviewing and questionnaire should be the same. So we have done first two during this project. We have done the pre-test by cognitive interviewing the children and parents, and we have done the instrument test, not yet with results, but it's the field work is done. So I'll talk just first briefly about this pre-test or the cognitive interviews. And our aim in this cognitive interviews is mostly focused on the questionnaire quality. We wanted to see, do the kids and parents understand the questions, understand the instructions, and understand the answering skills. And that's something that we want to see. So we, as Jenny said, we use different aspects of well-being in the questionnaires, and we use the scales already tested as a good and validated scales. Someone said SDQ. Yes, we have it in our questionnaire, etc. So we have a PANAS and something which is very common in psychological measures of well-being, but we also have other well-known and established scales from different studies done before, and we have some of questions that we created by ourselves, and we put our focus in 31 particular questions, items, scales, and instructions that we want to test in this child questionnaire, and 37 items that we found the most important in the carers questionnaire. We want to see the quality of translation of these questions, and to see how it works cross-nationally and in different cultures. So we have these two samples, in fact, the children's sample and the carer sample. We have like 36 kids from 4 different countries: Croatia, France, Finland, and Ireland, age 7 to 9. Most of them are 8 years old. And we have a care balanced by gender, and like 15% of minority language. We also have some balancing sample of this by education of parents. Carer sample, 40 participants, 10 in each country, and 18 of them were carers of infants and 22 carers of 8-year-olds, mostly female, and diverse by educational level. So just shortly what we have found out after this cognitive interviewing. The major findings, just in short. So the first thing that we noticed, that we have to minimize the bias arise from parental interference. So as we have parents and kids in the same room, when you want to interview the children, some parents can interfere to extent that is more than adequate. Wording in the kids' question should be simple, and language should be as simple, and avoid any complex language structures and constructions, any negatives and double negatives. Of course, we know that any averaging or by average day, how much do you use media or stuff like that is not understandable by kids of age 8. That's what we found. So no averaging, no recall in the time frames, and use the show cards. That's something that we found as very, very useful. We have to use the show cards. About the parental questionnaire, we saw that maybe more questions that we assumed to be the part of self-completion models should go in the self-completion model, because they are sensitive in a way about the pregnancy and stuff like that, about the child bullying as a bully, not as a bullied one. Language should be as simple as possible. Again, open-ended questions should be avoided, especially about the recalling, about the weight or height of the child. Very similar to this, as anywhere you can put the categories, not the open-end questions, especially because according to recallings. And We have to harmonize and adapt all the possible questions to different cultures and country specific, I know, legislative or something like that. We have to be very careful how to use these questions and to have all possible answers and how to harmonize it afterwards. So that's something we have to take care very closely. And after that, we made our first version of the questionnaire. So we made all these changes. We adapted the questionnaire. We made a questionnaire for children the easiest to understand, and we suggest using, and we've developed the show cards and everything like that. We made instructions to interviewers how to act with kids, and we translated the questionnaires to be very culturally sensitive, and we adapted everything to be the best we could. So we find this cognitive interview very useful tool to do that, and we are happy that we did it, and we just passed to the piloting. And Ognjen will say something about it and how it went in our countries.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Ognjen Obuchin. I'm a researcher at TNED, and I'm also, together with Sandra Florian and Nathalie Leboutiec, scientific co-director of the French guide study. In what follows, I will basically tell you some few words about the implementation of guide pilot service. So the implementation of this service was one of the principal objectives of the coordinate project. And the idea was basically to use large-scale cohort pilot using harmonized research design in selected European countries. Which European countries are we talking about? So this is originally same countries that were used in pre-pilot: Croatia, Finland, France, and Ireland. So the idea was to take into account the heterogeneity, both institutional and cultural, of European countries. But then at a later stage, Slovenia also joined the pilot, since they secured their own funding. So the piloting research procedure was developed by survey agencies under the supervision of Work Package 5 and in coordination with Work Package 7. We interviewed 3 groups: 8-year-olds, parents of 8-year-olds, and parents of newborns. And around the sample size was supposed to be identical in all countries. The idea was to interview 250 respondents from each group in each country, which would amount to 750 respondents in each country. However, this sample in Finland was reduced by 1/3 due to budgetary reasons, and so that in Finland we have 167 respondents per respondent group, which gives some 500 respondents in total. So Tony told you some things about, he was telling more generally about the purpose and objectives of piloting service, but I will say a few more words about the objectives of this pilot, specifically from the perspective of the guide project or infrastructure. So most generally, the idea was to develop and support the instruments that would support the data collection for guide. And then more specifically, well, the idea was to specify the guide questionnaire, to configure appropriate tools and procedures that will ensure the quality of the data collection plan, to test psychometric properties of the pilot questionnaire, including translation and cross-cultural invariance, and to test all guide instruments and protocols, including software, training material, interview protocol, sampling procedures, and also, last but not least, fieldwork outcomes. The survey was organized and implemented as in the coordination of 3 main actors, or 3 main groups of actors. First, we have scientific partners, which is Ivo Pilar Institute from Croatia, INED from France, University College Dublin from Ireland, University of Helsinki from Finland, and Science and Research Institute from Koper in Slovenia. Then we have survey agencies, depending on the country, Ipsos or Kantar, and a very important actor in this preparatory phase was Center Data, non-profit research institute from the Netherlands, located at the campus of Tilburg University. Basically, the role of Center Data was set up and support of the infrastructure for data collection and data delivery. In the preparatory phase of the survey, we also had to take into account a number of ethical and legal considerations. This issue could be a topic on its own for a whole presentation on its own, but we don't have that much time today, so we'll just focus on what is most essential. So, for instance, just to illustrate, before answering the survey, the parents were given consent forms with very detailed information about, for instance, confidentiality, data protection, data storage, when their answers, identifiable information will be deleted, what their rights to data are, and then what would be a procedure to make a complaint. And then also during the interview in all the countries, the interviewers were also given training on how to interview children, which is arguably one of the most sensitive aspects of the survey. So they were basically explained that children should feel relaxed during the interview, that the interview procedure should be as much fun as possible, that the interview should not switch too quickly from one question to another, etc. So after the preparatory phase has taken place, it was time to actually start the field work. And Croatia, France, Ireland, and Slovenia started their field work in the spring. In some of these countries, it also ended in spring, and in some other countries, it ended in the summer 2023. In Finland, the field work started in the summer, and it ended some 10 days or 2 weeks ago. One important distinction between these two groups of countries is also the way the interviews were done, because Croatia, France, Ireland, and Slovenia, it was basically the copy interviews, in-person interviews, while in Finland, the survey was CAVI-based, so computer-assisted video interviews. Also, there was a variety of sampling methods and recruitment strategies that were applied in different countries. So in some countries we had like recruitment in public places, in front of schools or in the parks. In some other countries, the starting point were the so-called seed respondents of the agencies that were contracted to implement the survey. And then in almost all, or in all the countries, snowball procedure was used, although to varying degree of success. And then in Slovenia, actually, the recruitment was based on a random sample that was provided by the Slovenian National Institute of Statistics. During the field work, the scientific teams were receiving regular bi-weekly updates by both agencies and center data. While agencies themselves, they applied several mechanisms of quality control. And one, for instance, just to illustrate one of the mechanisms of quality control were the so-called back checks, where agencies call back the respondents to make sure that in the first place the interview has actually taken place, and then they would also check the information that were recorded in the questionnaires. Good, so much about survey implementation. Yeah, so this is the socio-demographic profile. Although the sampling procedure, the having national representative samples was not the priority at this stage. The socio-demographic profile of the sample to put it simply, it kind of makes sense. Like when we look at, for instance, there's a fairly balanced proportion of boys and girls among both. When looking at both parents of 8-year-olds and parents of newborns. Then, of course, not very surprisingly, the majority, or in some countries, huge majority of respondents were mothers. The employment rate of the respondents, and in most cases mothers, was substantially higher among mothers of 80 or parents of 8-year-olds than parents of newborns, which also makes sense given that many parents of newborns are on maternity leave or parental leave. Most parents of 8-year-olds were married at the time of the survey, which was not necessarily the case among parents of newborns. The share of those with tertiary degree, it ranges between around 30% to 60%, depending on the country. Most respondents live in urban areas among both parents of 8-year-olds and parents of newborns, with the exception of Slovenia, where actually most parents live in the rural areas. So this being pilot survey, one of the principal objectives was basically to see to what extent the survey is feasible, but then also the second objective was to draw certain lessons that could be applied, that can be applied at a later stage. And in this context, the evaluation by respondents themselves were precious to us. So basically, all the questionnaires, including children questionnaires, they contain questions about evaluation of the interview itself. So when we asked the children at the end of the interview, how did you feel about participating in this interview and answering my questions, around 80% of children said that they felt well or even brilliant, whereas most of the remaining kids felt that they declared they felt neutral, while a very small share of children declared that they did not feel well or not well at all. When it comes to the question on the understanding of the questions, well, very important feedback. Around slightly more than three quarters of the children said that they understood questions well or very well. However, that leaves us with around 1/4 of the children who thought that their understanding of the question was so-so or not very good. When it comes to adults, parents, for instance, an important question that should be taken into account when designing future questionnaires: did you find the interview to be too lengthy or exhausting? There's an interesting difference here, is that basically among parents of newborns, around 60% say that not at all. They did not find the interview to be too lengthy, not at all. But this was only the case with 40% of parents of 8-year-olds. Why this difference? That could be maybe even counterintuitive. Well, because the parents of 8-year-olds, when answering the questions, they also take into account the fact that their child answered the interview as well. So basically, the interview did take place longer for them than it did for parents of newborns. This being a panel study or future panel study, one of the key questions in the evaluation is how likely would you participate in an interview such as this one in the future, in a few years. Around half or more than half of respondents suggest that they would participate with pleasure, or they say that it's quite likely. So more than half or 2/3, around 2/3, we can say that we can count on their participation in the next in Guideway 1. However, there's some 10% of respondents who say that they would be not at all interested in participating in the future survey. So much about evaluation. Given all these considerations, and some of the considerations maybe not directly discussed today, we come up with a set of what we call survey takeaways and reflective points. Some of these concern survey preparation and implementation, while the others concern the content of the questionnaire. So survey takeaway, recruitment method matters. Yes, it does, because the evaluation of for instance, evaluation of the interview was less favorable in the settings where the recruitment was taking place in public places as compared to the settings where the recruitment was taking place based on random sample or starting more based on when contacting seed respondents. Financial incentives increase response rates and improve respondents' feedback. In some countries, there were no financial incentives, while in some other countries, the respondents were given small gifts ranging from 10 euros to 20 euros, depending on the country and respondent group. And yes, the feedback was better in the settings where these incentives were present. CAVI, so computer-assisted video interviewing, is to be considered for hard-to-reach populations. So we have not received the report from the Finnish agency yet. But the initial, but I do have data on evaluation, and actually the evaluation among Finnish respondents is very, very, very positive. So CAVI may not only be considered as a tool to reach hard-to-reach population, but even maybe as an alternative to CAPI. Then we may need more thorough training for child interviews. As for the questionnaire, there's some evidence that in some contexts, some children have difficulties answering 5-scale answers. And then there are also some existential questions, such as the meaning of life, or are you optimistic about the future? They were somewhat too abstract for at least some 8-year-olds. We would also probably need further discussion about potential intrusive questions. This would not necessarily mean that we should remove them, but maybe that these questions, that the respondents could answer these questions on their own rather than answering directly to the interviewer. And then, yeah, given the evaluations that we received, the question of the length of the questionnaire deserves to be discussed. And to conclude, survey, well, the main message, the pilot survey has been a success. It's feasible. It's taken place, and the pilots took place around the same time we reached the desired sample size. The feedback from the respondents is very positive, and we can argue that the questionnaire content constitutes a very solid base for future questionnaire for guide wave 1. There are some, I mean, this is also the point of pilot surveys, also to reveal where are the improvement opportunities. And in our view, there is some room for the improvement of sampling methodology, or at least in some contexts and in some countries. This also concerns the refined recruitment techniques, and also, well, training procedures. In this context, the role of the Guide Prep Horizon project that runs until the second half of 2026 could be very important, because Guide Prep has specific work packages for each of these aspects of the future survey. So work packages that aim to improve each of these aspects of the questionnaire and of the survey in general. So thank you for listening.